to help you have more productive conversations with reporters. So I'm going to drop a couple of links in the chat here, and they are resources for you. The first is our cheat sheet with sort of top tips and tricks that help you engage with reporters. So I hope you can take that with you and use it for future media interactions. And the second is a list of some practice interview questions that we're going to use after we complete our slides. We're going to do a little activity at the end where we ask for some brave volunteers. So we hope that someone will pipe up and be willing to practice with us. And just want to echo Eric, one final thing, we welcome your questions at any time, so feel free to drop those in the chat or raise your hand. And I'll turn it over to Jacinth.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacinth. So today we'll be going through the steps of a media interview. We'll be sharing techniques on how to help you steer the conversation, also share tips on how to help you get quoted, and lastly, like Katie mentioned, practice what we've learned at the end.
So we'll start with talking about why we think it's important to engage with media, why we're glad you're here to do that. Obviously, it increases the visibility of the work you do when you talk with a publication about it. It gets the attention of important audiences like potentially government officials, policy staff, funders, and of course the general public, and it leads to a better impact for your work. So hopefully, ultimately, better public policy and programs, new funding opportunities, and a more knowledgeable and engaged public. So I just want to start with an example of a quick example for you of some urban research that really led to great impact, good results for us. And this slide shows the cover of an Urban Institute report that has images of a number of colorful front doors. So this was an Urban Institute project where researchers conducted interviews, tests with over 16 months. They were examining landlord acceptance of housing vouchers in 5 cities. And they found landlords consistently reject housing voucher holders. And in 4 of the 5 cities that they studied, rejection was even more common in low poverty neighborhoods that were believed to offer educational and economic opportunities. So this next slide shows headlines from the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the LA Times, and they were all publications that covered this study. So the study generated a lot of media coverage. We got 134 media mentions by our count in national and local publications, print, radio, and TV, including these outlets that I just mentioned. And the study's findings were also cited in at least 3 editorials that highlighted the problem, talked about solutions for change. And that led to the LA City Council and the LA County Board of Supervisors ultimately passed legislation that prevented housing voucher discrimination. Then Senator Kamala Harris and Representative Maxine Waters requested briefings with Urban on the study, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development launched a series of landlord listening sessions with the goal of understanding the reasons that landlords reject housing vouchers and the goal of developing recommendations for policy reform. So this is just kind of a quick example that shows you what media coverage can really do. It can highlight an issue and it can lead to real policy change.
So the most important part of the interview happens before it begins. And what I'm referring to here is the preparation. So the preparation is just as important as the interview itself, and it has the potential to completely influence the outcome of your interview.
So just a few things to remember before you do the interview. You are really in control. You can help shape the story, and it's up to you to use an interview opportunity to your advantage. So you're not just there to answer the reporter's questions. This is really an opportunity to be proactive and to think about what you'd like the final story to look like before you even sit down to do the interviews.
So one thing that can help you be prepared for your interviews is preparing your key takeaways. So spend some time ahead of the interview, organizing your thoughts and really prioritizing the main points that you want to get across. You can make some notes, jot some things down. And when you're thinking about the main points that you'd like to get across, here are some things to keep in mind. So the 2 or 3 most interesting points you want to make about this particular topic, this can really help you hone in on what you want to say. And it can be a range of things, including key insights, recommendations, or potential solutions. What surprised you? Something that surprised you is more than likely to surprise the reporter and their readers. A few statistics or percentages on the issue that are particularly noteworthy. So standout numbers are a great way to put things in context. And reporters can often create a whole story just off one particular or one noteworthy statistic or percentage. The policy implications of your particular issue, and then again, why the issue is so important. Oftentimes we hear reporter ask about the importance of a particular issue, so definitely feel prepared to answer that question.
So we know you work with diverse communities across race, ethnicity, ability, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic status, and more. So another thing to think about when you're preparing those key takeaways is whether your work is related to structural racism and or discrimination, because interviews are a key way that you as trusted messengers can communicate to and educate reporters and the public about structural racism and discrimination and really work to increase racial justice and equity. So to the extent that your work is touching on these important issues, you just may want to think about how to highlight them in those key takeaways and in the conversations you're having with reporters.
So here's an example of an Urban Institute researcher, Matt Chingos, addressing structural racism and discrimination in a recent interview he did with Agrio. So he says, the challenge faced by students of color, particularly Black students, in higher education have roots in our nation's racist history, from slavery to Jim Crow to redlining. So again, talking about these important issues during interviews is one way you can raise awareness and work to increase racial justice and equity.
So this slide features an image of stick figures, and they've got question marks, gears turning, and a light bulb hovering above their heads. So when you're speaking with reporters, you're often talking with them about a problem that your work identifies. But in addition to just identifying those problems, it's also really helpful to reporters and to the public if you can talk through solutions or recommendations that would make the situation better. So our general guidance here is when you're trying to do that, always to be able to ground your statements in evidence and be able to always point back to research to show what works here.
So this slide features a photo of a child practicing the piano. So often this is the most important slide in the deck. Practicing definitely helps you prepare for an interview. So writing out your key ideas, like we said before, and quotes ahead of time, even if you have just a few minutes to prepare. Practicing out loud is also helpful. It makes you more comfortable speaking to reporters and your approach to interviews in general. And you'll also just have less anxiety and nervousness around speaking to the media. So now we'll watch a not so great interview. So this slide features a video of a spokesperson conducting a press conference in front of reporters. So think about what he could have done better and how he could have better prepared himself for this interview.
Is there a reason the senator won't say whether or not somebody else bought some suits for him?
Rachel, the senator has reported every gift he's ever received.
That wasn't my question, Colin.
The senator's reported every gift he's ever received, and we're not going to respond to unnamed sources on a blog.
So Senator Coleman's friend has not bought these suits for him, is that correct?
The senator has reported every gift he's ever received.
Why can't you say that? Why won't you give us an answer, yes or no on that?
He's reported every gift he's ever received.
We haven't asked whether or not he's reported every gift he's ever received, and I will take your word that he's reported every gift he's ever received. Has he ever received a gift of suits?
He's reported every gift he's ever received.
So as you can tell, it was not the best of interviews. You're never going to be in a place to say no comment because you have done nothing wrong. And as you can tell, he did not come prepared. He did not have his key takeaways. So coming in with your key takeaways is a great way to be prepared for an interview.
So during the interview, we have a couple of tips for you to keep in mind for a successful interview. This slide features an image of two professional people sitting in chairs conversing with each other. So you want to keep in mind to be confident. You are the expert. Remember, the reporter is coming to you for your expertise. Take your time. It's normal to speak quickly when nervous, but remember, you're the expert here. Pause before answering. This ties into taking your time. Don't feel you need to immediately launch into your answer. You can give yourself a moment to gather your thoughts. Speak in lay terms. It's easy to get lost in the details of your topic area, so you'll want to avoid super technical language or, using too many acronyms. Be concise. You don't have to say everything you know in the first answer. A good interview will be like a normal conversation where both the reporter and the expert are getting a word in. Listen carefully and don't be afraid to ask for clarification. This is important because you want to make sure that you fully understand the question before you're answering it. Don't feel obligated to answer every question. If you don't know something, you can say you don't know. You can always check on the answer and get back to the reporter later. Alternatively, you can steer the conversation back to the topic or answer that you've prepared your key takeaways to talk about. And it's okay to speak up if you hear an incorrect statement. Remember, the reporter isn't the expert here, so it's possible they might say something in error. Always feel free to correct them politely without repeating the incorrect statement. This slide features a video of an expert being interviewed for PBS NewsHour. So now that we've seen an interview, an example of an interview that wasn't like the best, let's take a look here at a different interview. So here we have Yonah Freemark on PBS NewsHour discussing how some cities are offering free public busing. So while you're watching the interview, I'd encourage you to write in the chat box how you think he did.
The drive.
There are still a number of questions for cities who are considering doing something similar. So to get a wider view of what's happening, we're joined by Yonah Freemark, who studies this field for the Urban Institute. Yonah, thank you so much for being here. As we heard in Casey's report, Washington, D.C. is making this move. Can you give us a little sense, what is it that cities do want to do this? What's the rationale for this?
There are a few key reasons. Number one, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of cities want to improve service for their customers in a way that reduced the contact with drivers. So they said, fine, board at the back of the bus, don't pay a fare. And with that, I think a lot of cities got the idea and got the knowledge that it was possible to make buses free without too much of an inconvenience. At the same time, a lot of cities around the country are trying to increase the equity of service and trying to make sure that public transportation is something that's useful for everyone.
As we heard in this report, a lot of DC riders on the buses are people who don't make a lot of money, and so this could be a real savings for them. But she also reported that this is going to cost DC something like $42 million. Are there other benefits that the city could get for that cost?
Well, the biggest benefit is going to go directly into the pocketbooks and the wallets of people who are riding the bus. And that's mostly going to be people who live in the city of Washington, but also some people from the suburbs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the city is going to benefit in terms of, increased revenues, but it could benefit in terms of higher quality of life for the residents who live here.
So are there examples of cities that have tried this where those goals have actually been met? Meaning, does this actually work?
So most of the research tells us that when
So this is an example of practice really paying off. Yonah is relaxed, he's confident, he's clear, he's concise. And you'll also note his background is great for a Zoom TV interview, and his camera's at a really good angle where it's directly straight ahead and at eye level. So how should you highlight your key takeaways? What do you do when the questions get tough? I'm sure these are the questions that are burning through your heads right now, but lucky for you, we have some answers. This slide features an image of a red flag waving in front of a blue background. So a great way to get yourself, kind of get your point across is to use the flagging technique. So flagging indicates that you're about to say something reporters should pay close attention to. When the reporter goes back later to review their notes, this is essentially what they're going to be looking for. So you want to use phrases like, the most important thing is, the one thing to remember is, the key thing is. These tend to make a reporter's ears perk up, and it helps direct them to the key points that you've prepared ahead of the interview. You can also circle back to re-emphasize these points toward the end of the conversation when the interview is wrapping up.
This slide features an image of an open book with a highlighter and several lines of text highlighted. So summarizing indicates that the conversation is winding down and flags to the reporter that what you're about to say is important. So think of it as a closing statement that really drives home your key points. So you can use some of the phrases listed here. So to summarize, as I mentioned earlier, or the bottom line is that.
This slide features an image of a bridge. And this is a tip that's one of our favorites. We see urban experts use this a lot, time and again. And it's for when questions come up that just are a little tricky. They might be totally out of left field, really off topic. They might be too political in nature, and you're not comfortable speaking to it. Or it could just be a question that you just do not know the answer to. And in these cases, you can use these phrases to sort of bridge back to your key takeaways that you've already prepared that you're comfortable speaking to. So you can say, well, I'm not an expert on that subject, but I can tell you, and then just go right back to that key takeaway. Or I don't want to speculate, but what I can say is, or that's actually beyond the scope of my work, but what I can say about this work is XYZ. So this just helps refocus the conversation, directs it back to what you want to speak about when you don't have an answer ready to go. And it helps you not have to say something like, no comment. So let's talk about 3 things that typically happen during an interview. First, you talk to a reporter on background or off the record, and that's when you provide information. It helps them as they're thinking about or working on a story, and ultimately your name doesn't appear in any resulting piece that they write or publish, but it's still great because you're still helping out the reporter and you're building that relationship. Or number 2, you talk to a reporter and they use what you tell them in a story, but they paraphrase it. So they're paraphrasing what they say and they are attributing it to you. So that's also great because you've helped out a reporter, you've built that relationship, and your name and or your organization's name is in the piece, which helps to build awareness. Finally, kind of what we're aiming for here is you talk with a reporter and the reporter quotes you directly in their piece. So this is great because you've helped out the reporter, you've built that relationship, but getting quoted is really exciting because you've said something in such a great way. The reporter wants to use your exact words in the way that you said them and attribute it to you and your organization. So let's talk through some tips for getting yourself quoted. So this first example here is storytelling. We recommend trying to think of anecdotes or real life examples from your work that really put a human face on the issue. So this is a quote from Urban Institute researcher Stephen Brown. He's highlighting the racial disparities and the impact of COVID-19. He does so in a really concise but visual but impactful way. He's discussing the economic fallout from business closing and jobs losses and how they're expected to have a greater impact on Black and Latinx employees. And he says, when white America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. And after he was quoted in CNN with this, we saw this quote picked up again and again, recycled by other reporters in other publications over and over.
Another trick to getting yourself quoted is to provide standout numbers. A reporter can build a whole story around an interesting, remarkable statistic. So you want to be prepared with a couple of key numbers to share. So here we have an example with Marla McDaniel talking about enrollment in safety net programs. And she says, We're not talking about 4 in 10 people reporting difficulty enrolling in their yoga class. We're talking about food for their families. This isn't trivial, what people are seeking.
So myth busting is another great way of getting a reporter's attention. So try to think about what's the public debate is getting wrong or what is counterintuitive about your area of expertise. What kind of surprises you about this issue? So this is a quote from Jesse Janetta, an urban researcher. He's talking about the response to spikes, police response to spikes in violence. And he says, particularly when you've got a community where levels of violence are high, trust building is rarely one of the first things named in work that needs to be done. Often a lot of the immediate response that comes when there are spikes in violence is a lot of heavy enforcement, which in fact can exacerbate trust issues where they already exist and make it harder to build peace and maintain it over a long term. So this might be surprising to some audiences. It clearly caught the attention of this reporter.
So another way to get yourself quoted is speaking in pictures. As we all know, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and speaking in pictures evokes imagery, makes good visuals, and overall just makes your quote a bit more memorable. So this quote is by Emma Fernandez, who notes that there's a tendency among policymakers and advocates to forget about students in broader conversations about affordable housing. So she says, our concept of a student is that pop culture idea of an 18-year-old leaving home and living in a dorm. But the reality is that many students live off campus, have a wide age range, and may even have children of their own.
So we talked about thinking through those key points and getting that great quote in, but beyond just delivering the pretty quote, it's really important to think about your choice of words and to use language that is inclusive and respectful, and to be conscious of avoiding reinforcing negative narratives in those interviews. So this is a quote from Elena McCargo talking about racial disparities in home ownership. And she's talking about how some people will try to justify the racial disparity in lower home ownership rates by characterizing Black people as more financially irresponsible than white people. And she says, this is not an issue of behavior. It is the inequity that is the problem. It's the same issue that resulted in that man holding his knee on George Floyd's neck. It's rooted in a long history of a system that has been working against people of color. So she really does not reinforce the negative narrative around this issue, and she goes a step farther to correct it, to really make her audience think about systemic inequities at the root of this issue.
So we have a couple more slides to go. So if you make a mistake, it's totally okay when speaking to reporters. It's okay to rephrase your answer if you felt like it was unclear or inaccurate. You can say something like, I'd like to rephrase my answer, or I'd like to amend my previous answer, or just plainly say, let me try that again and start over. Sometimes you may hear reporters saying something incorrectly, and it's okay to correct the reporter politely, but try to do so without repeating the incorrect statement just because you don't want to be saying something on the record that's incorrect. And lastly, reporters, they'll often ask at the end of a conversation or your interview, is there anything else you'd like to add? We definitely recommend saying yes. This is just another opportunity to really drive home your key points, maybe reiterate your key takeaways, or explain why the topic that you're talking about or issue that you're talking about is important.
So after the interview, you're almost done with the entire experience, but before you officially wrap things up, there's a few things to kind of keep in mind. So you want to thank the reporter for their time. Cultivate. Once you speak with a reporter, we encourage you to keep up with them, whether it's through a follow-up email with links to resources or engaging with them on Twitter. And that can be something as simple as giving them a follow. The debrief. So take a moment to think about how the interview went. What were the positives? What are the things that you want to work on? And then promotion. So make sure to keep track of any of the resulting media clips and share them with your network. So a few last things to keep in mind, be quick and response. So Remember that reporters are often on tight deadlines, and it's really important to be as responsive as possible whenever you get an inquiry from a reporter. So make the information accessible. Keep in mind the readers or viewers of this interview may not be as well versed in your topic area, so you want to make your information as accessible as possible. Think through your key takeaways to the extent that you can. You really want to have a one-pager ready with all your key takeaways for the interview. Remember, you're the expert. The reporter is coming to you for help, so you're at an advantage. Say something that stands out. This can help increase the chances of you getting quoted and make the interview more memorable. And practice. As we all know, practice makes perfect, so don't be afraid to do it with friends and family or alone in front of the mirror.
So this is our last slide. We're about to show a video of an interview with BBC News. The expert being interviewed gets a surprise when someone joins the interview.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months.
So this just shows you really can't, this was before the pandemic. Yes, I'm sure this happened again a lot during the pandemic. This just shows you really can't plan for everything. But this expert recovered, even though his 2 children joined the interview and his partner saved the day by removing them from the interview. He did just fine. I think he even became kind of a viral sensation and got 15 minutes of fame. But anyway, sometimes unexpected things happen. But that's okay. After this training, we hope you feel a little bit more prepared to get out there and speak with reporters. So that is all we have for you today. We'd like to open it up for some questions. We welcome questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and be unmuted, that'd be great too. And I wanted to just add, I know we didn't touch today on media pitching, which is another thing we do, but we didn't really cover that in this training. If anyone has questions about media outreach, feel free to ask those too. We can touch on that.
If no one has any questions, which I don't think anyone has, I can't see everybody. I don't think so. Okay, so if no one has any questions, we will move on to the practice session that we talked about earlier. So it's similar to a mock interview. So we'll give you some time to answer potential questions we believe reporters might ask about your work. So these questions will get you thinking about the types of responses you may want to give during an interview. So we're going to give you a few minutes to jot down some notes, and hopefully we'll have some volunteers share their responses. And I think that link was also shared in the beginning. So if you can click in the chat box and just scroll up, I think that link was put there. So we'll give you all a couple minutes and we'll come back, hopefully with some volunteers to answer the first question.
So I think the document that was shared is the media interview cheat sheet. And I don't see questions listed on here.
Okay, 1 second.
I just reposted.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
thank you.
So did I, sorry. So they're in there twice. Yeah, so these are just a few practice, like 4 practice questions.
Can give you about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, so do we have any volunteers for the first question? So can you provide a brief description of your organization, your role there, the services you provide, and the people you serve? Don't be shy, this is a judge-free zone.